All right, let's start with explaining what happened. And by the way, I'm not going to get down to the cellular level. So you're not going to hear me talking about like how neutrons fire and that sort of stuff. I'm talking at a little bit more of the macro level of what a nuclear reactor is, what happened, and then we'll jump into the recap. So first off, what is a nuclear reactor? So a nuclear reactor generates energy.
Mm-hmm.
And it generates natural energy. So you have something called radioactive decay, which we're all in a state of at all times. Your cells are slowly decaying. That gives off some energy. Well, what they do is they take uranium and they
Mm-hmm.
enrich the shit out of it so that this radioactive decay is amped up to a huge level. And so you have all of this energy being fired off in the way of neutrons. And when these neutrons hit each other, they explode and create even more energy. So how does this work? Well, they create these structures that are like really long cylindrical cement buildings. And
Mm-hmm.
Spencer, do you know why the buildings are cement?
I actually don't. Why do they use cement in particular?
Well, because cement is so dense
Mm,
that these neutrons, when they hit each other and they bounce off, don't go through the cement because the cement is so dense, right?
that
And
makes
we
sense.
see this. We see cement later in the series, so that it comes up again and again. So you have these long cylindrical buildings, and within it, and these are RBMK reactors, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are a particular that and by the way, RBMK it's a Russian acronym, so I can't tell you what it is. It's just Russian words.
It's Russian.
Sure, but it's an RBMK reactor, and an RBMK reactor is structured this way. So you have your long concrete cylindrical building, and in it you have a core. The core is made up of graphite. It's made up of graphite, but it also has thousands and thousands of little pins in it that have been poked into the side of this graphite that all have enriched uranium. Now, the core is only a very small part of this large building, and within it you have space for water. So water comes in. Well, why does water come in? Well, because when you have this core that's firing and creating all this energy, and all these neutrons are hitting each other and exploding and creating massive amounts of energy, you have to have a way of regulating it. You have to regulate it in two ways. One is to control the reaction, how many neutrons are firing at a time. And two is to control the temperature. With RBMK reactors, water does both of these things, which
Mm-hmm.
is dangerous. Why? Because you only have one way of regulating the reactor, and that's through water. If the water gets fucked up, you're screwed. You have a base for water. Obviously, you have pumps that are pumping water in. You have the core, and then you have a top. The top is about a 450-ton cement top on it, right? Which is basically, and I know God knows how they got it up there, but 450 tons, boom, right on the top. And now, how does this work? Well, you have this enriched uranium core, and you have a well for water. Well, you have pumps that pump water in continually. And when the water comes in, it will meet the heat and the energy created from these firing neutrons, release steam. Steam goes up, there's a propeller. The propeller moves, that energy gets captured in an energy grid, right? So that's how this whole thing, that's the benefit of this whole thing. You have this naturally occurring energy that gets captured through steam technology into a propeller and then put on an electrical grid. So, of course, the most important thing here is to keep water going. That happens through pumps. The pumps are powered by electricity. This is the fatal flaw of the RBMK reactor because let's say the power shuts off. Well, then the electricity that goes to those pumps that pump the water in, that regulate the temperature of the core, they shut off. Well, what happens then? Well, they have backup diesel generators. Here's the trick. You can only go about 10 seconds without pumping water into the core before you risk a meltdown. And what a meltdown is the temperature gets so high that literally it melts into the ground. It just melts down. And it takes about 60 seconds for the backup diesel generators to get going. This is your fatal flaw with the RBMK reactor. And the fucking most Soviet thing in the world is they knew that, and they still put them in place and made them operational. Anyway, with a sort of, we'll figure it out later. So you have this gap between the 10 seconds that you can allow water not to go in the core and the 60 seconds it takes for the backup diesel generators to get going and to flush water into the core. Well, what did the Soviets do? Well, they thought about it and they said, hey, I have an idea. Well, that big propeller, right, that the steam is going up and hitting, that's generating the energy that goes on the power grid, that's going to still be going when the power goes out, right? It doesn't stop right away. That's a big, heavy propeller. Well, why don't we reroute that excess energy, down to the electrical pumps to keep them going for another 50 seconds, actually really about 2 minutes, so they have a little bit of a window until the backup diesel generators get going. Kind of a smart thing, right?
Yeah, it's kind of you're kind of trying to turn your generator into a perpetual motion device, at least for a short period. That where essentially it's powering itself, or at least allowing itself to continue to function for a brief period.
So that required some rerouting, right, of the energy. There's like these special basically when the power goes off, it trips this thing, which reroutes the excess energy from that still rotating propeller down to the water pumps. The water pumps go back online, and that's a period of just a couple seconds, so you don't hit that 10-second window. It flushes water for about 2 minutes, and then the backup diesel generators start powering the pumps. That's great. Well, what I just described there, a electrical shutdown, and then trying to get the backup diesel generators going, is the safety test that happened the night that Chernobyl exploded.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they were doing. It's so ironic, but and I think I'm using that term correctly, actually.
Yes,
I don't know anymore. Yeah, the internet's messed with me on that word. But yeah, so they were running this safety test to make sure that if the electricity shut off, the residual power from the propeller could actually bridge that gap, that 50-second gap between when water needs to be flushed into the core to keep it stable and when the backup diesel generators get going. Now, what happened that night?
They confronted two other fatal flaws of this design, because one just wasn't enough.
Exactly. So you had a team in place of folks who, by all accounts, were well equipped to actually run this test.
Mm-hmm.
And they were ready to go. And another nuclear power plant in Russia went down. And so they said, hey, Chernobyl, you can't go offline because we have people coming home and we have to, power their ovens and their lights or whatever until everybody goes to bed. So can you stay online until about midnight? And they said, yeah, sure, no problem. Problem with that is they sent everybody home who was otherwise equipped and ready to run this test, and they just supplied them with the night crew who were not remotely ready. And the head guy who was in charge was Anatoly Dyatlov. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in preparation for shutting this down, they powered down the plant slowly. The idea being, if we're going to run this test, we have to have this nuclear core generating the least amount of electricity it ever will. Why? Well, it's a conservative test, right? That way at a baseline, if this is powering as low as it possibly goes, the propeller still has enough residual energy to bridge the gap between when water needs to go to the core and when the backup diesel generators get going. I know I'm in the weeds here, but just follow me.
Mm-hmm.
They powered it down, but the problem is the night crew powered it down way, way, way too much. They almost shut the whole reactor down, and this was just operator error. They just screwed this up.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I didn't tell you about the design of a nuclear generator is that you also have cooling rods. These are rods that you push down into the core, and it will soak up excess energy. This is yet another way to control and regulate the amount of energy that is coming off of the core, and ultimately the temperature. So when the power went way, way, way down in anticipation of this test, they thought, well, we can't run the test now because there won't remotely be enough residual energy in that propeller, right? So the test would fail. We can't have that. We have to get that energy up. We have to get the heat up in the core. How are we going to do that? Let's remove every one of the cooling rods. So they pulled every single fucking cooling rod out of it. Well, what happens? Water is being flushed in. There's no cooling rods to regulate the energy coming off the core, and it is generating massive amounts of steam. And now you have a spike in temperature, a spike in energy. That propeller is flying around, and it is getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And they think, oh, well, we can't run the test now because we'll tip our hand that let this thing get completely out of control. What are we going to do? And history is unclear on this, but somehow, some way, a button gets pushed. And that button drops every single one of the cooling rods back into the core.
Kind of the emergency stop procedure.
Yep. Normally that would be fine. But as Spencer alluded to before, you have a second design flaw with the RBMK reactor. And that is the cooling rods are tipped with what? Graphite. Why is that a problem? It displaces the water. When you displace the water, it goes back into the core, releasing yet more steam, and it basically acted like a trigger. You had an already overheated reactor. You dip the graphite rod the graphite tipped cooling rods back into the core. You displace the water, you generate yet more steam, and the core literally exploded. And when it exploded, that 450-ton concrete cap actually propelled into the air off of it. So think about how much energy you have to do that. The entire core exploded. All of that graphite that had all of those enriched uranium pins in it just goes flying into the air, and you have the Chernobyl disaster. Thank you.
Very well said, sir. Couple little tidbits I'll throw on top.
Fire away.
Couple just of terminology. You said at one point that it's neutrons hitting each other. I would say it's really the neutrons hitting other atoms that then fire off neutrons, a kind of chain reaction effect. But that's a debate of terminology everybody goes over. I describe it as a turbine rather than propeller. Otherwise, BJ will make fun of you. And then the last.
He's going to beat me up
of course,
for that completely. Yeah.
BJ exists to do that to us. The only thing I'd say as well is just a little trivia at the end of just how much energy was going nuts in this thing as a result of the spiral effect that came from the graphite being inserted in the core in that massive degree. So the core is already unstable because of another design flaw in the RBK reactors, that if it operates at low power, it is inherently going to fluctuate a fair degree, going zero high in a way that's difficult to control as is. If you already take that difficult situation and put the graphite effectively trigger in there, the reactor went from something like its normal operational maximal threshold of like 2,800 megajoules to, we think, before it just exploded, 35,000 megajoules in like a second. Cap goes flying, explosion happens, fire starts, world starts to end in a new and creative way that no one could have really seen coming.
Yeah. Excuse me, Spencer. Yeah, so you have great radio, cough into the mic. Yeah, so you have resulting fires that are associated with the high amount of heat that was generated off of that core when it exploded. Few more facts about this situation before we jump into the recap. This happened at the Chernobyl nuclear facility. This was reactor 4, and the closest town is called Pripyat, which was in the Soviet Union, now is modern-day Ukraine. Had a population of about 50,000 people. Mm-hmm. We have absolutely no idea about the death toll. And the reason for that is a lot of people died of residual effects of radiation poisoning years and years later. Of course, the Soviets weren't logging all that information, so we don't know. But multiple international organizations have done studies and tried to get estimates. And it's somewhere between 4,000 and 200,000. So we really don't know.
Not helped by the fact that all this is happening in 1986, which is roughly 5 years before the collapse of the Soviet Union. So already unreliable Soviet records, coupled with the fact that they were bringing in people from all around the Soviet Union to fix this and sending people out to all kinds of various places to avoid it, throw in that their then central system of records goes down from the nation itself no longer existing, you're looking at a very unreliable series of data to try to approximate from. So we truly will never know, and the only relatively certain accurate figure we have is the figure published by the Soviet Union itself as to the total deaths as a result of this accident. 31.
31.